Hey, everybody. I'm Eboni K. Williams, along with Kat Timpf and Guy Benson. This is the Fox News Specialists. Just a short time ago, President Trump unloading on the controversy around his response to this weekend's racist violence in Charlottesville. His remarks coming amid an infrastructure policy announcement. It was intense.
The statement I made on Saturday, the first statement, was a fine statement, but you don't make statements that direct unless you know the fact. It takes a little while to get the facts. You still don't know the facts. There was no way of making a correct statement that early. I had to see the facts, unlike a lot of reporters. I didn't know David Duke was there. I wanted to see the facts. I think the driver of the car is a disgrace to himself, his family, and this country. And that is, you can call it terrorism, you can call it murder, you can call it whatever you want. I would just call it as the fastest one to come up with a good verdict. That's what I'd call it. I watched those very closely, much more closely than you people watched it. And you have, you had a group on one side that was bad, and you had a group on the other side that was also very violent. And nobody wants to say that, but I'll say it right now. You had a group on the other side that came charging in without a permit, and they were very, very violent. I've condemned neo-Nazis. I've condemned many different groups, but not all of those people were neo-Nazis, believe me. Not all of those people were white supremacists by any stretch. Those people were also there because they wanted to protest the taking down of a statue, Robert E. Lee. So, excuse me, and you take a look at some of the groups and you see, and you know it if you were honest reporters, which in many cases you're not, but many of those people were there to protest the taking down of the statue of Robert E. Lee. So, this week it's Robert E. Lee. I noticed that Stonewall Jackson's coming down. I wonder, is it George Washington next week, and is it Thomas Jefferson the week after? You know, you really do have to ask yourself, where does it stop?
All right, Guy Benson, I will start with you and quickly come to you, Kat Timpf. I heard the president in those remarks, Guy, really double down to me on his initial response, his Saturday response to this tragedy that happened in Charlottesville. Obviously, I said my piece yesterday. I will double down on it. What struck me the most, and there were a few things, when the president says he didn't know David Duke was there. But then we see David Duke just moments ago on Twitter saying, thank you, President Trump, for your honesty and courage to tell the truth about Charlottesville and condemn the leftist terrorist in Black Lives Matter and Antifa. My thought, Guy, is if the president wants to kind of play dumb around the David Duke issue, that's one thing. But when he says he doesn't know he was there, and David Duke clearly knows who President Trump is, at this point, how long does that narrative even remain something that we can entertain and really not flat out laugh at and reject?
I mean, look, there's a lot to unpack in what we just watched there from the president. And I've been scrolling through Twitter and seeing some of the reaction, and some in the press, I think, are reaching for the smelling salts over everything that he said. And I think there were some points that he made that are legitimate and totally defensible. Where he really lost me was when he was saying and objecting, saying there were some fine people in that protest in Charlottesville on the alt-right. He was trying to draw this distinction between neo-Nazis and white supremacists and some of the good people, quote unquote. But this was a white nationalist rally. He was talking about the torch evening, right? They were chanting things like, Jews will not replace us. There's nothing good about that.
It's nothing
ambiguous.
So,
look, and let me say this. There are people in America, many of whom I'm sure are watching us right now, who may object to or have qualms about taking down these statues, who are good people and who are not racist.
Absolutely.
But they were not at a white nationalist rally, which is what occurred on Friday night.
Yeah, we'll get to that. Kat, something else on the initial part of President Trump's remarks this afternoon. He said that he wanted to get all the facts and he wanted to preserve judgment till he had more facts. I have to say, this might be the first time I've heard President Trump show that level of restraint around fact gathering.
It's honestly crazy for me to have to comment on this right now because I'm still in the phase where I'm wondering if it was actually real life, what I just watched. It was one of the biggest messes that I've ever seen. I can't believe it happened. If there's any sort of car attack, normally I'm surprised that he didn't come out and say that it was a terrorist instead of, waiting
Islamic
to say
terrorism.
something. This was clearly an Islamic terrorist because he's done that before he's had all the facts. He's not measured in his criticism. He goes after people as soon as he has the inkling. For it to take 48 hours, That is something he has never done before. And yeah, it shouldn't be some kind of bold statement to say, yes, a gathering full of white supremacist Nazis doesn't have good people in it. Those are all bad people, period. And the fact that that's controversial makes me want to, I don't know if I should just like laugh. So I mean, I have like too much eye makeup on to start crying right now. It's disgusting.
Yes. We're guitar specialists. I will say I made a personal plea to President Trump yesterday. Obviously, he did not take that to heart. I asked him to call out David Duke by name. He says he didn't know he was there. Well, sir, David Duke certainly knows who you are and what you stand for. We'll now meet today's specialist. She is a former CIA Middle East analyst, a former senior State Department official in the Obama administration, and a Fox News contributor. Her specialty, though, rooting for Ohio State football. All right. Marie Harf is here. Oh, man. And she's a criminal defense attorney, has 11 years of trial litigation experience, and has represented numerous individuals in federal court cases. But she specializes in collecting sea glass from Florida shores. Whitney Boan is here. Thank you, ladies, for being with us. So, again, so much to unpack. What stood out to you, Whitney?
Oh, gosh. You know, I'm with Kat. I had a hard time trying to keep it together just watching that press conference because it devolved so quickly from good points. Like Guy said, it was points like, you know, I would like to have all the information before I say something. I'd like to encourage that for President Trump. Like you said, this is a new phenomenon if that's what's happening. However, what's really troubling is that this became more about, you know, we're concerned about statues and we're concerned about permits than we are concerned about the fact that we have neo-Nazi white nationalists threatening the safety of Americans based upon their race or their ethnicity or their religion. And that's where it went, and he refuses to acknowledge that. And it's almost like stealing victory from the jaws of defeat, because this would have been really easy from a PR perspective if from the beginning President Trump had just said, Nazis are bad, and this isn't okay. It's not okay, and it's never going to be okay. And I don't support this, and I don't care if they have shirts on with my name on it, and they're carrying banners with my name on it. And it's irresponsible for him to say, like you said about David Duke, in terms of when David Duke comes out and says, I'm encouraging white nationalists and KKK members to carry out President Trump's agenda of making America great again, and this is what it means. And then to stand there and be like, you know, I didn't know that David Duke was there. It's irresponsible. Yeah. It's disappointing.
Marie, what stood out to you?
I'm with everyone else who's already weighed in on this. I think he's doing this moral equivalence again, and we saw it on Saturday, and he got a lot of pushback for that. Yesterday, a lot of people said he finally, you know, did the right thing, and even though a lot of us thought it was too little too late. Everything he did yesterday was just undone. I mean, that was an epic meltdown. And if we, you know, I don't know why he is so hesitant to criticize the alt-right. I think we all have, and Nazis, I think we all have theories on that. But Kat's right. He fires off tweets. What after the Merck CEO, it took him, what, 15 minutes? And then he says, well, but I need to get all the facts. I can guarantee you if that had been a Muslim in that car, he would have said something right away. It would have been much more inflammatory. He would have gone after that person. And I think we have to, in this country, there's clearly a lot going on right now about these statues, right? Not just in Charlottesville, in Lexington, in Gainesville, Florida, across parts of the South. You know, I went to UVA. I know what's going on there. We need a leader who can help our country navigate through what is a really tough, difficult, complicated set of issues. And we don't have that in our president. And that scares me, and it makes me sad. And for every Republican that complains that Democrats like me say the party now is in bed in part with the KKK and Nazis, the leader of the party, the president, is not doing anything to make people believe otherwise.
Well, I was just going to say real quick, Guy, those pictures we were just showing were in Durham, North Carolina, and I used to practice law in front of that courtroom and walk past that statue every day. So I understand, and I grew up in North Carolina. It's a deep-seated, intense, divisive, powerful issue. Go ahead, Guy.
So just a few points in response, Marie. I think that what the president's defenders would say watching that press conference was he did repeatedly specifically attack Nazis and white supremacists. He called the driver of the car a terrorist and a murderer. That just happened today. My problem, as I said at the beginning, was sort of lumping in all of these alt-right people together and trying to separate who are good people and who are bad people at a white nationalist rally. But to say that he did nothing to dissuade Americans that the right doesn't stand for Nazism, I don't think that that's fair. And to your other point quickly, when you talked about navigating these difficult issues on the statues, for example, the monuments, I don't think the media necessarily helps when immediately, when he's making a point about Washington and Jefferson being slave owners and where do you draw the line about whose statues you take down, people with blue check marks on Twitter are saying, oh, my God, he's comparing Robert E. Lee to George Washington. that's not a fair assessment of what he's saying. So if we want to have a reasonable discussion about some very tough issues, we shouldn't intentionally mischaracterize some of the more reasonable things that he's saying while correctly calling out the less reasonable things that he said.
So the problem with that, though, is because of all the crazy things he says, the reasonable things just get lost. And he loses credibility to even be a thought leader, if we can even use that term about President Trump, on this issue. And I think that while he, yes, said bad things about Nazis, he tried to balance it in those remarks and said, well, there are some good people there. And guys, the alt-left, which is a term I think he just invented, the alt, because I've never heard it, the alt-left is just as bad as the alt-right.
Well, the alt-left exists.
But I don't know where to start with that.
Right. Well, they are bad, and they have done bad things. They have been violent, and that's very bad, and that should be condemned when it occurs. However, somebody was murdered at this rally, and it was not done by someone on the out-left. Think about if someone that you love was killed, and the response was, yeah, a lot of people murder people, and it's bad every time.
Right.
No,
Right.
you condemn the specific murderer and their motivation, and you examine that issue.
Whitney, let me get your take on this, because you said, Guy, and correct me if I'm wrong, that President in these recent remarks did unequivocally call out the driver as being, what did you say you called him?
He said you can call it terrorism and a murderer.
Okay, so he's talking terrorism. He said, I think he said, you could call it terrorism.
He didn't say terrorist.
You could call it a murderer. I'll call it the quickest to a verdict, whatever.
Right.
But this is also what President Trump tweeted out a year ago. Anyone who cannot name our enemy is not fit to lead our country. Anyone who cannot condemn the hatred, oppression, and violence of radical Islam lacks the moral clarity to serve as our president. For me, Whitney, that sounded like a lack of moral clarity, pretty much in the president's own words.
I mean, and that's the problem here. Where the president keeps breaking this down into moral equivalence, where, and to Guy's point, you know, when he outcries and says this person's a murderer and he may be engaging in terrorism, what the problem becomes is he lacks any real authority. He lacks any real passion or belief in a way that Americans are looking for in terms of stand up against hate, when it's always followed with but. It's always but. It's always, he's a murderer, but there were other bad people there. And those people are alt-left, and those people are liberal or whatever. You know, it lacks any firm statement. And so, Eboni, yes, I mean, what we need is a president who can stand up and say something that's even consistent with what he said a year ago in terms of people who he believes are terrorists on domestic soil or people who he believes are terrorists on foreign soil.
Well, the FBI in the past year has put forward a number of reports about the fastest growing threat of homegrown terrorism in the United States is from these extremist white nationalist groups.
Guy, go ahead and get him.
Well, yeah, and that's a real concern. Then you also look at situations like the shooting at the baseball field with Steve Scalise at the FBI, for some reason that boggles my mind.
Also domestic terrorism.
Well, they called it not domestic terrorism.
No, it was, though. It absolutely was.
Yeah,
and you're right. That's
was.
the hypocrisy. You
So
are correct, Guy.
when
There is hypocrisy there.
When you're gathering statistics, if you're not including the Scalise shooting as an act of domestic terrorism, people say, well, what the hell is that about? So my thing is this. You can very unequivocally condemn what happened in Charlottesville, condemn the vile hatred of the white nationalists and neo-Nazis, and then put a period on the sentence and end it there.
Exactly.
But if we're going to have later a conversation about political violence in this country, you cannot airbrush the violent left out of that conversation.
I think that's
they are
fair.
part of it.
I think that's fair. And I will say this as well, when it comes to this conservative Republican thing, I think you were mentioning this, Marie, I would never, and not that you did, but I don't put this on Republicans. I don't put this on conservatives. I don't put this on people that hold conservative beliefs, because I think that is a miscategorization of their politics. And I think it's a sad day in America that for many, that distinction has become unable to be clear. And I think that this rhetoric is a large part of that.
And it's also because the leader of the Republican Party is so wishy-washy on it. I mean, we've all heard what Bob Dole said when he accepted the nomination. We've heard George H.W. Bush, Ronald Reagan. Every leader of the Republican Party, when the KKK and white nationalists have tried to make common cause during elections, have said very clearly, we don't want any part of this until Donald Trump. And I was really heartened by all the senators who came out over the weekend, by the Republicans like Ted Cruz, Chuck Grassley, Orrin Hatch. But the leader of the party and the leader of our country isn't doing the same thing. And that's a problem.
Yes, up ahead. A serious potential blow to the conclusion in the allegations in the Russia probe. Stay with us.
A new Russia leak might actually be delivering some good news for the Trump administration. The Washington Post reporting that a former low-level campaign staffer, George Papadopoulos, had repeatedly tried to set up meetings between campaign and Russian officials, including a sit-down between Trump and Vladimir Putin. However, the report, which cites campaign emails that have been turned over to congressional committees, says that staffers' efforts were met with alarm by numerous campaign officials, including then-campaign chairman Paul Manafort, and ultimately rejected. On top of that, new reporting by Politico shows that the Obama administration was warned multiple times by national security officials that Russia was moving to disrupt the U.S. political system. Those warnings came as early as 2014. Guy, you wrote about this today, right? I want to get your take on it.
Yeah, so I think that when we're considering the Russia issue and the narrative about collusion, it's very important to follow the facts. That's one of the reasons why I've supported the special counsel investigation. That's why I was very tough on Team Trump when the Donald Jr. email chain came out, which I thought looked bad and contradicted a bunch of what they had said previously. This, on the other hand, is good news for the Trump campaign. It is countervailing evidence. It got far less attention than some of the other bombshells got. But this shows high-level people in the campaign repeatedly being offered opportunities to meet with Russian officials all the way up to Vladimir Putin. They said no. They said these are concerns that we have. There could be Logan Act violations involved here. We should talk to our allies in NATO before we do anything with the Russians. It looked like a responsible campaign, making sure that they're adhering to protocols. So this is not unto itself vindication for the entire story from the vantage point of Trump, but it is a data point that is helpful to their contention that there was no collusion.
Eboni?
I was going to toss it to the fellow counselor here, Whitney. Is it a little exculpatory-esque, right? To Guy's point, something that kind of can rebut some of the really damning narratives around the collusion presumption. And to Guy's point, I think you're absolutely right. At the very least, it kind of points this in another direction.
Yeah, no, as a criminal defense attorney, I loved reading this today and seeing that there was actual paper, documented, or electronic form where they were doing the right thing. They were saying, you know, this is not only why it's a bad idea, but let's not let DT do this. Let's not let Donald Trump do this. Somebody make sure he doesn't. And it was well thought out, and it helps. I think that, again, it doesn't paint the full picture in terms of the entire investigation, and that's not done yet. But it's certainly a good point for Trump.
Sure.
Now, I want to ask you, Maria, of course, about the Obama administration, knowing about Russians potentially being interested in interfering in our elections. Why wasn't something done? Do you have any take on that? Was it they just not considered a serious threat, or what do you think?
Well, we were getting warnings as early as 2014, which, if folks remember, is when Russia went into Ukraine. It was very clear they were trying to meddle in other countries' affairs, we should say. So we were getting warnings that their cyber activities were ramping up. We saw this in Eastern Europe. We saw this across Europe. And we knew they were trying to look at our election system. But we didn't have credible, specific warnings about how they were going to do it, right? We didn't know they were going to target the DNC, for example. We didn't know they were going to work with WikiLeaks to target John Podesta, right? So we didn't have a lot of specific information. We were concerned about it. We raised it with the Russians privately a number of times. We tried to reinforce our own cyber protections for the government. But this is a really tough problem. And I read that article thinking, I wonder today if the Trump administration is maybe learning some of the lessons and putting in place procedures so this can't happen again. I've heard from a number of people that are still in that because they don't consider the Russia investigation a serious issue, that they're not doing maybe all they should be to prevent it from happening again.
Does that sound, I don't know. From where I'm sitting, it sounds a little weak that they didn't know specifically.
Well, it's true.
I understand it's a fact, but do you have to know the nitty-gritty and the absolute specifics to know that any presumption of involvement, or the possibility, rather, of involvement is still a serious problem?
No, you're right. And we knew it was a serious problem, and we were taking steps. I mean, in the cyber world, a lot of these steps you don't see publicly, right? We were taking steps. We knew in 2014 they were doing things in Ukraine. They were doing things in Crimea. We were doing things behind the scenes. But it is difficult when you don't have specific threat information.
Right. But
so this idea today that some people are saying the Obama administration should have been able to stop this, that's not fair, I don't think.
Well, now we have people on the left speaking passionately about a guy, which almost makes it look like perhaps they became interested because now it's politically advantageous for them to be interested. Right. So it's more of a political issue and about their party rather than country, which, quite frankly, always makes me sick. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, this is a president and an administration that was very weak vis-a-vis Russia throughout their entire time on office. Even before the president took office in 2008, he was weak on the invasion of Georgia. He mocked Mitt Romney Romney and ridiculed him ruthlessly in 2012 for being right about Vladimir Putin. He was invested in the reset button. He was invested in the Iran deal, which he needed Russia's help on. So there were quoted sources within the Politico piece saying maybe they knew about stuff, maybe they did a few things, but their actions were not nearly robust enough. They were too lackadaisical about it, and part of it may have been they decided that it was within their interests to soft pedal with the Russians. As someone
that was in the administration and who did actually have to work with Russia at times, I would very strongly disagree with the notion that we didn't take this seriously because we somehow wanted better relations with Russia. And I will take very, very strong exception with that as someone who lived through it. And for everyone who's concerned about Russia, we now have a president who's even softer on them, who won't criticize them over anything. So I can debate the Obama administration until my face turns blue.
Was your boss wrong about Russia in 2012 and what he said to Mitt Romney? Wasn't he wrong
about that? I honestly think that 2016 is very different than 2012. And yes, Russia was a
no, Maria.
I'm sorry. I don't think he was wrong. Look, would we have phrased it differently? Maybe. Okay, I will grant.
So
I will
Russia
grant you that.
Not so bad in 2012, super bad in 2016.
In 2012, Russia was not our top geopolitical foe, which is what Mitt Romney said. I don't think it was. 4 years later, they've done a bunch of really aggressive things. They've pushed out into Eastern Europe. They weren't in Ukraine. They weren't in Crimea.
They were in Georgia.
Which happened under George W. Bush. That's not Barack Obama's fault.
No, but he was very weak in not really condemning it, right? So
he wasn't president when it happened.
It's almost as if this issue is too complicated to completely flesh out in one block. Up next, the Justice Department is demanding data from a major Trump resistance website, and it's sparking a big legal showdown. Don't go away.
Welcome back. Thanks for being here. So the Justice Department squaring off with a Los Angeles tech company over anti-Trump protesters. A federal judge has granted a search warrant to the DOJ, allowing it to gather data on everyone who visited one of the major websites used to organize anti-Trump protests during his inauguration. The DOJ wants the data to help track down people from Antifa and other far-left groups who participated in rioting that day. But the company fighting back, they're saying this warrant is overbroad and unconstitutional, resisting in court. And yes, I'm a layperson. I'm not an attorney. Let's go to the attorney straight away. 1.3 million people caught up in this. They want data. They want IP addresses of everyone.
Sure.
In an effort, they say, to crack down on illegal rioting. Overbroad is a word that absolutely comes to mind for me. What do you think, Counselor?
Yeah, I think let's back it up. Classic constitutional law analysis here, right? And I'm going to toss to you in a second, too, Whitney. So you got public safety, which is the all-important threshold around any constitutional analysis, really, making sure people in this country are safe, versus Fourth Amendment rights against improper and illegal searches and seizures. So this kind of gathering of information and jeopardizing people's privacy rights. I would think certainly you want to make sure that we're balancing that, Whitney, in a way that is most narrowly tailored, to use some legalese, right? And certainly I don't think there's anything narrowly tailored about this request that we are currently seeing from the DOJ.
No, two words come to mind for me: fishing expedition.
There you go.
And prosecutorial overreach. That's another two words.
Oh, you're bringing me back to all those glorious law school days.
We're up to 4 words.
But I think, the issue here, too, is not just the Fourth Amendment. And it's not just, governmental interest in terms of public protection. The other interests here are also the First Amendment and exactitude in terms of the language that is in this warrant that needs to be scrutinized by a court now in terms of the challenges that's been raised by DreamHost, because it seems very broad to be like, we need all of your records about everything ever about this website, including every user, even if they deleted a message, their pictures, anything and everything. That's a fishing expedition, because there's no rational relationship between everything anyone's ever done on that website and them needing to protect the public.
Now, Kat, how this could probably look different, I was going to say, is let's say there was a particular instance of violence that we can know and point to that came about from these particular riots from President Trump's inauguration. And that individual, if they went to have a fishing expedition, so to speak, around that individual's behavior, the websites they visited, I think then you're getting closer to something that could survive constitutional scrutiny.
Perhaps. I mean, this is like really freaky. I don't know why there hasn't been more people being more freaked out by this, because pretty much everyone, I think, could agree that no one could look at what you do on the internet and think you're a good person. We all look at weird stuff on the internet. Everybody does.
Is true.
An unofficial survey, 99% of people said they don't want people to know what they're doing on the internet. The other 1% said, what's a computer? There's no way. I'm serious. I mean, come on. Because there's no reason for this. And if this is allowed to actually happen, I'm terrified for the future of the country, period. Civil liberties are dead if this is allowed.
I agree. This is insane. And I'm not a legal scholar, but I want to hear some more outrage about it. I agree with Kat. I don't know why people aren't more upset. And I have to imagine if this had happened in the last administration, a lot of people would have been very upset if Barack Obama's DOJ had gone after millions of people that signed up on it, to protest him. So I want people to get fired up about this. This is insane.
I think that's the sad thing. And you talk about it often, Kat, and I think very rightly so. The intersection between actual policy or constitutional integrity and outrage versus the politics. The politics override everything nowadays, and it's a sad day.
Absolutely, and we have to be very careful not to just destroy our own liberty by attempting to say, oh, for security.
And security purposes are a legitimate
I
thing,
don't feel very secure knowing the White House can look at my browser activity. That makes me feel less secure than anything I've heard about.
Exactly. The constitutional issues are not fully explored or appreciated by the American public. You're right. I mean, people need to be upset about this.
Yay, good consensus on behalf of the Constitution. That's the way it should
Yay,
be.
Constitution.
And straight ahead, the mooch telling Stephen Colbert that it's time for Steve Bannon to be shown the door at the White House. Is a fresh shakeup imminent? We'll discuss when we come back.
Welcome back to the Fox News Specialist. Our specialists today are Marie Harf and Whitney Boan. Now let's continue the conversation. Recent reports are fueling speculation that Steve Bannon, the chief White House strategist, could be out of a job soon. Anthony Scaramucci, the ousted White House communications director, poured gasoline all over that during an appearance on Stephen Colbert's show last night.
Let me explain. Okay, but I said he was, and I obviously got caught on tape saying he was, so I have no problem saying that.
Okay.
But
is he going to be gone in a week?
That's up to the president. But
what do you think? What do you think? What does the mooch think?
Well, if it was up to me, he would be gone.
Okay.
But it's not up to me.
All right. The White House is under intense pressure from Democrats and other critics to fire Bannon in the wake of the Charlottesville violence. Just today, the leaders of 4 minority House caucuses sent a letter to the White House demanding the removal of Steve Bannon, along with 2 other prominent White House aides, Stephen Miller and Dr. Sebastian Gorka. This afternoon, the president responded to what may be ahead of Bannon's future.
I like him. He's a good man. He is not a racist. I can tell you that. He's a good person. He actually gets a very unfair press in that regard. But we'll see what happens with Mr. Bannon. But he's a good person, and I think the press treats him, frankly, very unfairly.
All right, Guy Benson, I'm going to let you just run with that.
I think the formulation, we'll see what happens with Mr. Bannon, is probably not one that augurs particularly well for the future of Mr. Bannon at the White House. But I could be wrong. We all thought that Sessions was on his way out, and, he's ensconced in that position right now. I just want to take a step back. If you're Anthony Scaramucci, right, you just went through
How fun, by the way.
maybe the most epic flame-out in recent political memory. You go on Stephen Colbert's show, and Colbert can eat people for lunch. Yeah. I thought he was sharp, self-deprecating, funny, likable, made some good points, poked fun at himself. I thought it was a good, effective performance from Scaramucci. And I was nervous for him. I was actually anxious. I couldn't watch it live or, as it aired, but he did very well.
Hey, Mooch. I wasn't nervous for you. I knew you killed that. I knew you killed that, Mooch. Kat, so what I feel certain of, that if Steve Bannon is to go, it will not be because of pressure from Democrats, and it will certainly not be because of presumptions about whether or not he's a racist. But perhaps if he is the leak, and that is certainly what the Mooch and other people have insinuated, then possibly that might reap for something bad for his future.
Possibly. However, we all have those friends who we keep around because they know too much, right? A little bit. Like, I have like 3 of them at my birthday party every year. I don't really want them there. They might cause a disturbance, but they'll cause an even disturbance if I cut them loose.
Can you name them?
I'm sort of kidding. I'm totally kidding, guys. I'm sort of kidding. But honestly, think about the fact that Bannon probably knows a lot, and he's been very close to Trump for a while. And if he was let go, and Bannon was upset about it, with the influence that he has in the media, it could look pretty bad for President Trump.
Marie,
I agree.
Let me ask you this, though.
Yeah.
I noticed the president, I think, very intentionally said, look, Bannon was kind of brought in at the tail end.
Yes.
He was kind of late to the party. Was he deflecting or downplaying that a bit?
Yes, and that was very telling because we know that Donald Trump hates these insinuations that he didn't win this on his own, right? Because then he went on to say in that press conference he just gave, I went through 17 senators and governors before I even met, before I brought Steve Bannon on, basically saying I didn't need him to win this because a lot of the media says that Steve Bannon, his support, the support from media organizations like Breitbart are what helped him win the primary.
It's almost like he's pushing him towards the trap door.
Right.
You know, he's kind of just edging him over there.
Steve Bannon will do at Breitbart or in the media if he gets fired. I mean, Donald Trump has to be worried about that right now.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what's going into some of this calculation.
I don't know. I actually think, Whitney, that if it came down to Steve Bannon and Breitbart versus Trump and his base, I think Trump wins that every time, quite frankly.
I think that Trump thinks that Trump wins that every
I
time,
think he
either
does.
way. So I don't know. I disagree, but I think that.
Really? You think Bannon and the Breitbart base will be stronger than the Trump base?
I think that they could.
We'll take it around the tables. That's your take. Kat?
No, I think that the Trump base will stick with Trump no matter what.
That's exactly right. What I think. Guy?
Generally, that's correct. Now, the one pushback I would give, I invoked the name of Jeff Sessions just a moment ago. There was immense pushback on the right against the possibility of losing Sessions, and that seemed to have had an impact. So it's not like Trump's entire base is always saluting everything that he does. People are concerned if certain folks that they like are being edged out. But I think your point to the leaks is the important one. If he's the leaker, then it's seen as him undermining Trump, and that's an unpardonable sin in the White House.
But I think the big, just to go to what Guy said, it was actually more telling, I think, that Trump didn't get rid of Sessions because of the congressional pushback, that he wasn't going to get a new attorney general. It was when all these Republicans in Congress said, don't touch Jeff Sessions. I agree with Whitney. I think Trump believes he has this base no matter what, but that's a premise that I'm not sure he wants to test heading into an election year in 2018. I mean, Breitbart and that whole media world that Steve Bannon has his finger on the pulse of is incredibly influential. And if we don't have health care, if we don't have tax reform, if we don't have infrastructure, we've seen what can happen in this space, and that could be a tough election cycle. If there's a divorce there's a divorce between Trump and Breitbart.
I think President Trump comes out on top on that divorce, but we'll see. Coming up, Kim Jong-un retreating from his threat to attack Guam. Is President Trump's hard-nosed approach to thank? Stay with us.
Thanks for being with us. Kim Jong-un backing down from his threat to attack Guam. Despite releasing an image of Kim reviewing Guam attack plans, the rogue state saying he's going to watch America's behavior a little bit more before taking any action. All right. Former Trump campaign manager Corey Lewandowski giving credit to President Trump for calling Kim's bluff.
Well, look, I'm not surprised by this at all. What we have seen from previous administrations for 30 years is trying to coddle North Korea, trying to work with them. What this president said was, you don't want to mess with me. He's a man of business. He and General Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, were very clear. If North Korea launches a missile at us, General Mattis said it will be a declaration of war. And we are the world's greatest superpower. The President of the United States was very clear that if North Korea tries to do something against the United States, he will react swiftly, decisively, and it will be a complete annihilation. And I don't think they're ready for that.
Yep, I think those are some fair points right there. So let's start with you, Marie.
Yes.
Kim blinked, right? That's very clear. He blinked first in this. So in my mind, there's some vindication here for Trump's approach, because there was a lot of bedwetting in Washington about, oh, my gosh, he's saying these really incendiary things about North Korea. This is irresponsible. It seems to have broken through, though, to the regime. Does the administration get some credit here?
Well, I think President Trump might have sort of stumbled his way into deterrence that actually is currently working. And I didn't love the rhetoric, but I also didn't think it was the worst thing that had ever happened on the planet that President Trump did. Deterrence basically works. I mean, they already have missiles. They already have nuclear weapons. Deterrence works if they know that they do something, we will destroy them. And they're not going to waste that on Guam. I've always said this. If they're going to have one shot at taking out an American city, striking the U.S., they're not going to lob a few missiles into the ocean next to Guam. They're going to wait to do something else. So, yeah, I think for the time being, he has sufficiently scared them. They know that they will be rained down upon with fire and fury, like the president said. I think we need to be careful now going forward so we're not back in an escalatory place where it feels like it's getting out of control. I think that's where we were last week. We're definitely in a better place today.
Eboni, was this fear?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I wasn't mad really at all with the president's comments on NOCO personally. I think, the strategies that we've seen before it have all epically failed. So I don't believe that diplomacy, I like it. I think it's great. I don't think it always works. I don't even think you can try it with some leaders. And I think Kim Jong-un is one of those. So I really feel that in this moment, yeah, I'm okay with crediting President Trump around this.
And Whitney, doesn't this bring us closer to a position where the reinstigation of diplomacy is possible, right? The potential crisis seems to have passed. The North Koreans said, all right, never mind, uncle. Now maybe you use the Chinese and get them to the negotiating table again. Again, it may not work,
right,
but I think we're in a much better place today than we were 2 or 3 days ago.
I don't know. I tend to disagree. I agree with Eboni. I am 100% behind Trump's statements in terms of this was not a situation where diplomacy was appropriate. When we're threatened with nuclear warfare, then that was the correct response. However, I do think the problem that we're now faced with is that it looks like in some ways that, are we going to follow up when we say things like that? If we're going to go out that hard, if we're going to go that strong, and we're going to say fire and fury and hell and brimstone,
we better
then we better be able to back it up.
Absolutely.
It can't just be rhetoric. It has to be something.
Right.
And I'm not saying that the thing to do in that situation was to go ahead and start a war. That's not what we want if we don't need to go there. If we need to go there, then we need to go there.
No,
but I do think that long term, I don't know how this will affect diplomacy because those are strong words if you're not ready to back it up.
And
Let me just leave it at that.
That goes to credibility. And
exactly.
Kat, this is what worries me, because there's a piece in Politico today about this, talking about containment. And we heard deterrence there from Marie. For years, the U.S. government said it's totally unacceptable for the North Koreans to have nuclear weapons. We heard that about Iran as well. I think Tehran is watching this and saying, is America starting to pivot to containment and acceptance of something that they said forever was unacceptable?
Right, you have seen that shift. It was a very strong, if you look at, Susan Rice's comments, like, oh, we could tolerate it. I want to know what happened in the middle from it'll never happen to, oh, yeah, it's fine, we'll tolerate it.
Well, what happened was they got
yeah, but in their heads in terms of that. And but I just think I've always said that, Kim Jong-un's clearly crazy, clearly bad dude, but he doesn't want to kill himself. And he knows that attacking us or attacking one of our territories or our allies is literally him committing suicide.
Assured destruction,
yes.
I believe
yes,
they call
because it's not mutually anymore, because they can't destroy the U.S. In the Soviet days, we called it mutually assured destruction because they actually could take out a lot of the U.S. The North Koreans can't, and they know that, and I think President Trump has made that clear to them. And a lot of State Department or administration foreign policy people would privately say, yes, publicly we have to say it's unacceptable, they need to get rid of their nukes, while understanding they're not going to.
And with that, we have to say goodbye to our specialists. Farewell, Marie Harf and Whitney Boan. Thank you so much both for being here.
Thank you.
And when we're coming back after this, it's wait, what? Don't go away.
And now for our last segment today, it's time for...
Wait, what?
All right, I'm going to start. Today's been a news day, so I wanted to share something that's not really news. A little kitty cat, a video of a little kitty cat got very, very scared. Look at what happens when this Detroit Tigers foam finger's thrown at him. Look at that. I didn't even know that I have one of those foam fingers. Anybody who's from Detroit and a Tigers fan isn't, has probably about 18 of those in their house because they give them out for free. And sometimes the Tigers have made me want to do that, but I've stayed loyal. So this kitty should calm down. And look at that. That's amazing.
Yes.
I could watch that all day. Maybe I will to relax.
I was gonna say, Kat, I'm sensing a pattern. I'm seeing lots of beautiful animal videos from you for Wait What. Is this your thing?
Animals can't really hurt you the way people can. Okay.
Or the way that story. Or the way Detroit sports can.
That's totally also true.
So yesterday, Kat brought to our attention a very important story about a gentleman who was nabbed by authorities for robbing a drugstore. And he was identified by his very distinctive facial tattoos. And you can see there he is. And I made the joke on the air that I had the exact same tattoos. Well, Twitter is a magical place. And so we have to thank Antivirus on Twitter, who immediately, within minutes, came up with this. And I think it's a pretty good look.
People are going to start saying they got the wrong guy.
Exactly.
That's what happens when you take that makeup off, guy. Found you out. All right, so this was amazing to me. We all know Taylor Swift was just successful in the lawsuit recently. But the best thing that came of it for me was this good, awful sketch from the courthouse. So we know that they do the courthouse sketches because this was not a televised trial. And it doesn't really look a lot like Taylor Swift, you might be thinking. Well, the artist came to his defense and said, she's actually just too pretty to draw. Like, legitimately, he said her proportions to her face are too even, too equal. It's all too symmetric, making her very, very hard to accurately draw.
Wow.
I'm sure
what a terrible problem to have.
She's too pretty, and it's horrible.
I think she'll shake it off.
Oh, that was real bad.
I'll see myself out.
All right. Well, that's all the time we have for today. We thank you all for watching. Make sure to follow us on social media at SpecialsFNC on Twitter and Facebook. Remember, 5 o'clock will never be the same. Special Report is next, and it's going to be so good. Make sure you watch it.
It's nice.